Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 389 featuring Mike Romey, who's currently the director of pipeline and software development over at FuseFX. But I have actually known Mike for many years. Actually, I met him long ago when he was working with my wife, believe it or not, and many moons ago. But he's actually been at several incredible places and has an absolute passion for pipeline, something that is extremely hard and tedious and complicated. But he loves to dive into pipeline, and I thought it was really cool to talk to Mike. Kristen, what do you think of Mike?
Yeah, well, he has had quite a career. He kind of takes us. He kind of started off, his biggest job was like at Zoic, and then to Walt Disney Imagineering, on to Madison Square Garden Entertainment, and like you said, now FuseFX. He's had over like 20 years experience in delivering like innovative solutions for theme parks, broadcasting, production gaming, and then big data analytics in mission critical environments. So podcast that just has a lot of great stories and information. You guys talk, about real-time CG, and he just really has like a passion for the product and process and like servicing the entertainment production through technology-based solutions. And it's just like, it's really interesting to hear him. And he's like just an efficient worker. Like you said, pipelines is his thing. So it's kind of fun to see where like his career will take him next.
Absolutely, yeah. No, he's done a lot of stuff in that area, and obviously has a big. He really understands databases and how to get data across multiple big shows and things of that nature. So it's really cool talking to Mike, and I just like Mike. He's just a really good guy. So it's really nice talking to him and catching up as well. Okay, we've got a couple of announcements. Kristen, what's going on?
Yeah, so we've mentioned this a few times, but V-Ray 6 for 3ds Max is out. And if you'd like to say any of the little special things it offers.
Sure. Yeah, you've been, obviously it's got Chaos Scatter has been added to it. A big thing that a lot of people are very interested in is our procedural cloud system that's been added to our Sky system. This is actually a directly based on our merger with Enscape, and so these are part of that process, and that's become a big fan favorite apparently, which is very exciting. V-Ray decal for for displacements, and we also have V-Ray proxies now support hierarchies, and this is again for 3ds Max, but all the other products will be coming very soon. So just be on the lookout for those as they get announced. A couple of events going on. Kristen, what's going on?
Yeah, so you can find these out at chaos.com/events, but the first one will be August 25th, so this week. It's going to be episode 6 of the Chaos Campus live show. They're going to discuss kind of the power of personal project and tips on how to feed your inner artist and diversify your skill set. So tune into that, August 25th. And then the next one is September 8th and 9th. It is 24 Hours of Chaos, which is coming back for the third year. It is 24 hours, 12 shows that are back to back. So each show's 2 hours. And we're just like, unite 3D artists, designers, ArcViz, animation, gaming, VFX, all over the world in one amazing event. So definitely tune into that to check it out.
Yeah, and as Kristen was saying, this is an event that goes around the globe over a 24-hour period. So it is kind of fun to be part of that. I love doing it every year. I was just when we first talked about it, we said, "There's no way this is going to work," and it totally works, and it's really great and a lot of fun. And some people do stay up all 24 hours, so good luck. Maybe you'll be one of those people. All right. Yeah. Okay. If people want to know more about the podcast, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And if you guys have any other ideas or hints about or suggestions for the show or guests you'd like to have on, email us labs@chaos.com. And I do want to mention something actually based on labs. I just put out an article, a labs article on our blog section. You guys should check it out. It's I've been spending the last couple of years on developing some new ideas in terms of virtual production, and I had basically I've been working on a virtual camera system using Unreal, V-Ray for Unreal, and live linking taking it to Vantage, and I talk all about it in a blog post. So go check it out. Go to our blog section at chaos.com and check out the article I wrote about virtual production. But for now, please enjoy episode number 389 with Mike Romey.
Welcome to another CG garage where the chaos group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
So can you believe it, Mike? I think we were still in the double-digit podcast numbers when you were on the podcast last time. We're now getting close to 400 episodes, and so that means it's been many years since we've talked.
It might have even been a single digit. I think you were just starting it.
I was just starting. It might have been just a single digit. It's been a long, long, long time. But it's been really exciting. And I don't know, did we ever go through your little origin story or never did? I think we were talking about some other stuff.
I think we did an April Fool's Day trick on some like real-time GPU-based rendering stuff.
No, it was UV ray, remember?
Yes. I think I got it was because I wanted to get on that video that you guys did with the where you did all the heist, and I was like, oh, I want to participate in that.
Yes. Yeah, we did UV ray. It was a Mike Seymour FX Guide April Fool's thing. That's right.
That was fun.
That's right. Okay. Well, now it's our opportunity to finally get to the origin story of Mike Romey. So what got you interested in computer graphics?
Gosh. I have to start at the very beginning, don't I?
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of interesting, the path you weave. I started in high school doing, drafting. I mean, like, hardcore, like drafting table, pencils, rapidograph pens. I started going to school at Art Center. I was doing these high school programs to learn graphic design. I thought I was going to be a car designer, but then I went and did graphic design. Mm-hmm. And I started, I went to school to study graphic design, and I had like a really strong technical illustration background, right? I was doing all these like really, complicated, exploded views of cars and phantom views of all the pieces, and doing these state, drafting programs. So I really had this dimensional experience, but it was very traditional illustration, airbrush, pens and whatnot. Started school and needed a computer for school. Got my, one of my first Macs then. It was like a Power Mac, something 7500 or 750 or something like that.
What year was this approximately?
1994.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. And started, got my uncle gave me, he's like, look, I want you to make a commercial for me. I'm like, excuse me? He's like, yeah, you got computers, you can do nonlinear editing. I want you to make a commercial. He was a lawyer, and he's like, I want to do this regional commercial in like Big Bear. And he's like, I'll help you get some of the equipment, but you got to do it. So I was like, okay. So I got Stratus Studio Pro. I got Adobe Premiere. I got a Radius Video Vision. I came to school with like this computer that like no student had at the time. It was like a full-blown like nonlinear editing computer,
Right.
And I helped him build a commercial. I learned Stratus Studio Pro. I think back then there was this game. What was the game that they made with Stratus Studio Pro? Myst. Right?
Myst.
Yeah.
Myst was with Mental Ray, wasn't it?
Soft Image was the second version, but the original Myst, I think it was Strata. Got exposed to Form Z, Electric Image in college. On my own accord, because I went to school to study graphic design, and they didn't know anything about 3D at the time.
Right.
And went to.
That was around the time of Infinity. Remember that one?
Oh
too?
yeah, I had Infinity. I had a cracked version of Electric Image at the time.
Mm-hmm.
What else did I had? I had Adobe 3D. I think it was like this text font, 3D thing.
Yes.
Anyways, went to school, studied graphic design, but kind of was passionate about 3D stuff.
Right.
So I remember it was like this is a really fun story. It was like a second or third year of college. I went to like one of the early E3 conferences, that gaming conference. And I was walking the floor, and I went up to, listen into somebody talk to somebody else. I was kind of butting into some conversation.
Sure.
And I was just listening in, and the gentleman's like, yeah, we're going to start a game company. We decided to leave Rhythm and Hues. We're going to start this game company in San Luis Obispo. It's called Off-World. I'm like, and I just went in there. I'm like, gave my hand. I'm like, hi, I'm Mike Romey. I go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo.
Right.
And it turns out the gentleman's name was Lauren Lanning, and he was a creative director at Rhythm and Hues with another lady called Sherry McKenna. And they started a game company in San Luis Obispo. I think at the time he gave me a card that it was called Off-World. And then later on, they renamed it to Oddworld. And it ended up being a game called Ace Oddyssey.
Yes, that's a great game.
Yeah. So I interned, there, which really was just kind of helping out doing stuff. But really, like, my hope was like, I want to get on those SGI impacts. I want to use Power Animator and Alias. I want to learn all that stuff. So like late at night, they let me kind of, run around on the impacts if they weren't busy, learning how to model and Power Animator and Alias.
Nice.
And so I kind of got my teeth pretty deep into that. So much so I convinced my parents that they sent me to a state school. So they kind of could afford college for me, which was great. And I'm like, look, I appreciate everything you did for me, but I want to go into debt. I want to buy an SGI-02 and Alias Power Animator.
Are you serious? Wow.
Yeah. So I was like the only student who had like an SGI-02, a Power Animator. I had two Macs in my apartment. I had a 9500 at the time. I had this old 7500.
Wow.
I was just blowing, and I had a part-time job on top of the internship because the summer before I went to school, I started working for this company called Data. What is it called? I forgot what it's called. It was a company from Hitachi that made these laser printers. And so I was doing all these illustrative PowerPoint diagrams for the president of this group. And he's like, do you want to keep doing some of these illustrations for me? They're really great. They help me with these presentations. I'll pay you while you're at school. And so I had this big giant, 11 by 17 laser printer as well in my room as well. and he ended up asking me to do this interactive CD-ROM as well. So I was literally modeling all the printers in Form Z, rendering it in Stratus Studio Pro while I was doing design work. And then they even gave me a budget to hire other students to help me, with Director and build this interactive CD-ROM where you could open up the printer, add paper, replace the drum. It was great. It bankrolled all my CG, efforts in college.
Right. That's impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
And what had happened was at some point I was kind of farther ahead than the professors were, and they'd gotten a grant to teach a class in 3D. The grant was a joint grant between the architecture program and the design department. And they're like, well, the head of the department, the design department, is like, Mike, you already know Form Z, and they're teaching Form Z in the architecture department. And electric image, and you have a lot of context in there because I was doing these trade shows for electric image at NAB in college. And they're like, would you help us put together a program? And I had another friend, Mike Rosenbrock, and we helped them put together a program to teach computer animation, where we kind of paired up like an architecture student who understood dimensionality and how to build something dimensionally with like a creative person to come up with the story, and they had a quarter to put together, an entire, animation, segment. I called all the people I knew at the time. Like I knew Karen Ross. I don't know if you know Karen, but she works in the industry doing marketing. And I begged her, I'm like, could you give us licenses of Electric Image, please? And she gave, the school like a bunch of licenses for Electric Image. So I started with Mike, helping the head of the department teach a program in computer animation really early using Electric Image and Form Z.
Wow. And you were still a student?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it took my 4 years and it made it 5.
Okay. All right. But you were busy starting curriculums, so.
Yeah. But when it was close to graduation time, the thing that was kind of cool was they had like a budget to bring people in to speak. And so they're like, okay, well, you want to help us find people? I'm like, yeah. Do I have a budget to take them out, for food, take them out to drink? He's like, yeah, find people you want. So I'm like, well, great. I'm going to use this to find my job out of school.
Nice.
So I ended up inviting 2 people to come speak to the school. And they were both people that I was interested in working for upon graduation. One was a gentleman named Corey Jones. He kind of set up a kind of a motion graphics studio called Reality Check Studios. And they were one of the first studios to kind of use Electric Image and Form Z. And then I made good friends with Alex Lindsay at the time, who was working at, what was the previous operation that they had at the ranch? Jack Films, maybe?
Okay.
I'm not sure which one it was, but they were doing, some of this early, Star Wars, Electric Image, previs work.
Didn't they become banned from the ranch after that?
Banned from the ranch. That's what it was.
Yeah.
So I invited both of them to come into Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is a beautiful town, and showed them around, and then they spoke, and then I kind of bridged those relationships to see, if there were career opportunities from there. And Alex brought me to the ranch to kind of see what it was like there, and Corey kind of, gave me his kind of pitch to work at Reality Check Studios. So when I graduated, I kind of had some opportunities that I could pursue in both options, and it worked out pretty good.
Nice. So which one did you take?
So you have to realize, like, I'm like this college student who has like, tons and tons of like computer software and equipment, right? And I was buying it left and right. And I picked working for Reality Check Studios over the ranch because I was like, I just didn't want to be a small fish in a big pond. And I thought I could be a big fish in a small pond. On top of that, some of the technical things that Reality Check was doing was really interesting. Right before I graduated, I'd helped, the summer before working with them, and they had won a bid to do the graphics package for CBS for the NFL. I guess CBS had won the NFL back. They had lost it for a number of years, and they were going to go on the air, and they were going to go on really big. So we had done a design pitch, and I had helped, with that. But the trick is that they were going to use some new technology to do the insert graphics packages. So instead of using the traditional Chiron, right, they kind of said, well, we're going to buy 7 of these SGI Onyxes that have these graphics engines. And there's this software from Norway called Peak Everest. It's a real-time rendering, like an OpenGL renderer, like Unreal, and we're gonna use that to build the graphics package to do all the insert graphics, and it uses like a kind of a MySQL database, and a Delphi entrance to kind of build the interface to cue the graphics to come on the screen and come off the screen. So I got kind of excited. I'm like, great, I'm going to have access to these $250,000, SGI Onyxes instead of these 40,000 impacts. And right out of school, I just jumped right in to help with a lot of that work. Actually, I take it back. My timing's a little bit. I did that the year before I graduated with them, so
Okay.
helped build that package. And what got me intrigued was the idea of rendering in real time, right?
Right.
And at the time, real time rendering, OpenGL was
Very
pretty
expensive.
early. Yeah, yeah, and graphics cards weren't. I'd say that graphics cards then were like the modern day NVIDIA cards, right? And they were these.
Well, that was the thing that was interesting, right? It was those when those first NVIDIA cards. Remember, they were called a Riva card or something like that came out. It was the first sort of graphics card that NVIDIA made, and that was like it had OpenGL built into it, which was like, you mean I buy this $200 card and its equivalent graphics to this $40,000 SGI, and that's what killed it. That's what killed SGI, man.
We would get because it was CBS and they had this like super support contract. They would drop off these $50,000 graphics cards that were like 2 feet by 2 feet, and when when the machines literally froze or they fried the board, we'd slide another one in, and that was the prerequisite to the SGI Onyx sorry, the NVIDIA cards.
Right.
So started working for them and doing a lot of work in this real time graphics arena. It ended up becoming a company called VizRT, which is still around today. And when I graduated, my mom's like, "You need to get a job. Go find a job." And she's like, "And you can't stay at home very long, right? You got to find something." So I literally called up, a family friend who had an apartment in West Hollywood, and I said, "Do you have any room, any space in the apartment building?" And she's like, "Yeah." So literally, I came home, and 2 days later, I told my mom, I'm like, "Your friend Candy who has that apartment building? I'm gonna stay there." And your mom was like, "I told you to leave the house. I wanted you to stay a little bit longer."
Right.
And immediately upon graduation, I had an apartment building in West Hollywood. I was working on Melrose and Cahuenga. And 2 weeks into the summer when I started, they're like, "We got this big project in New York. Do you want to go for a few weeks?" I'm like, "Okay, sure."
Right.
So they're like, "Okay." So I packed my bags thinking it was going to be 2 weeks. And long and short, that trip ended up being 2 years of a lot of neat experiences. But the project that they sent me to New York to help on was obviously to help with this CBS Sports Center using the VizRT system. But it ended up being also to kind of help with the Natural History Museum. They had the Planetarium Space Show there where they bought an 8-pipe Onyx. So instead of these mini fridges that we were using that were SGI Onyxes, they had 8 full-size refrigerators that all had graphics engines that were all packaged, up with a barcode projector, and they were building this dome like Epcot, and it had 350 seats and rumblers, and they were building a version of VizRT that was a multi-pipe engine that could basically render and blend in real time, 60 frames per second with 8, I think it was a 7-pipe Onyx, but they had 8 digital disc recorders that could record what you rendered in real time, and you could use a video feed as a video input. It was just crazy stuff.
Wow.
And we would work it was a construction site, so you couldn't actually go into the construction site till they were done doing construction for the day. So around 4:00, we'd go in and work till about 2 a.m, then come back the next day in the morning to the office, and we set up this mini dome system where we took 2 of the SG Onyxes from CBS, and we made one send the video feed out, and I made another one simulate the dome, where I modeled the dome with UVs, where it would take the real-time rendering of one and feed it to the UVs of the other one, so I could simulate what it would be like in the dome before we had access to the dome later in that day.
Wow.
It was pretty I say, digital cowboy-esque.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. It ended up, leading to, some other neat projects there. We did a few years into it after we did some Super Bowls, and we did even put a network on the air in Italy, in Milan, for Sky Italia. they had been approached by by Morgan Stanley. They said, we're building this new high-rise in New York City. I'm like, oh, interesting. And they're like, well, do you know much about, Times Square? And like, no, tell us more about Times Square. And they're like, well, they, during the 80s, it wasn't safe in New York City. So there was this city ordinance passed where your occupancy of your building on Times Square had to emit a certain amount of light based off of the size and volume of your space. So if you had a high rise, right, you had to, wrap the entire building with, LED signs or something, right?
Right.
So the architect had, they found this parking lot. They already had one office on Times Square, but they wanted to build a flagship building on Times Square. So
are you talking about number 4? No, you're talking about number 4 Times Square?
I think so. Yeah. Right. Madison. Yeah.
So
I was on Times Square for Morgan Stanley.
Right. It's the one that has the LED walls that go around, right?
Well, before that, they had the one that was across the street. Right. And the one that it has the LED wrapped around it was a parking lot. Right. So they basically bought the parking lot, and we're gonna build this big giant high rise. And because we have to have these city ordinances, the architect kind of feathered around the side of the building this LED screen that was basically like 3 HD signals around the side of the building. And they're like, and we have to put graphics on it. It runs 24 hours a day. And they talked to the natural history of Planetarium, and they're like, oh, that's great what you guys did with the real-time rendering with VizRT. Maybe we could do that on this building. So they bought an Onyx 3000, which was like the last refrigerators that they ever made. And it was a 3-pipe Onyx. So it was 3 of these full-size refrigerators that all kind of wrapped around the side of this building. And they're like, help, Reality Check will do the production work for the graphics package. The other part of the graphics package, the design portion, was kind of awarded to, what's the name of the company? It's been a while. Where's the cat? The Cat and the Fiddle in Hollywood?
In Hollywood, yep.
What's the visual effects? The motion
graphics? What were they called? It was a graphic company there. Yeah. Now I'm K something? Is it K?
I don't think so.
No.
Anyways,
I don't remember.
They had won the design package. We were responsible for the production package, and they put us in Riot Manhattan's office to do all the production work to build the graphics for the show for this sign of this building. And really, I was working as an intern at the architecture company that was doing that building at that time. That's so. It's such a small world.
Yeah, it was Fox and Fowl Architects is what it was. So yeah.
Yeah. So they're like, okay, we need you to build we've got to design some of these vignettes that are going to wrap around the building. We're going to use VizRT. They wanted to do it very procedurally. Think of it like Houdini, right?
Okay.
Procedurally building graphics packages that were loosely themed to Morgan Stanley, with video coming in, video coming out, very procedural, dynamic. And so it built, kind of to some of their design specifications, these templates of scenes that would run in real time. And they were building like a show control system at VizRT, and they had the core of it done, but they didn't really have the front end. So I was literally writing like XML code to build a 24-hour show graphics package to say, load up this grayscale image to offset the rotations of all these blocks, then start the animation to cascade them going down, downtown in the morning, and then cascade them going upstream, later in the day, and building like this 24-hour, graphics programming, really more than anything, a 24-hour graphics package for the side of the building.
Right.
And then
wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah.
It never took off though. We'd gotten to the point where we were like ready to be live, and then September 11th happened, and it changed everything for us. So Morgan Stanley was heavily impacted by a loss of some of their employees, and they determined it's probably not a good idea to have 2 high rises in Times Square at the same time. So they ended up selling the high rise to Lehman Brothers, and
Right.
you know how that happened. What happened with that?
Right. Yeah. Interesting.
So
All right. And then you were still in New York. So how you said you spent 2 years there. So where did you go from there?
so that was fun, and my wife was doing her graduate school. She finished her graduate school. I told her to come out to New York, live with me for a little bit, and then everything turned upside down. Our biggest client was CBS at the time, and right after the trade towers fell, we kind of focused a lot of our efforts on the CBS related work. I don't know. Again, it's weird times we live in, but right at that exact same time, they had the what was that thing that they were the poison that was being sent around as powder inside of
Oh,
envelopes?
anthrax.
Anthrax. There was the anthrax scare, and Dan
Yeah,
Rather's
that's right.
office was right across the hallway from the sports part of CBS. And I was like, I don't know that I think I'm not cut out for New York anymore.
Right.
So I came home and got married.
Nice.
Did a little bit more of my time in at Reality Check. But after a while, you kind of keep building the same thing over and over again, the same wheel.
Sure.
And I wanted something different, and I wasn't sure whether my my story was meant to be a creative story or to be a technical story, right?
Right.
Because I went to school to be a designer. I understood creative intent, and I ended up spending so much time doing stuff that was really technical that I was like, oh, well, maybe I should really go to be an art director, because kind of that's what I went to school to kind of pursue. I think that's where I met your wife too
At New Wave.
at New Wave. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I first met you, I think.
I think so.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah, what 20
years ago, yeah.
And they had a small little motion graphics group. It was fun. It was a lot less challenging than the technical, challenges of managing an SGI Onyx and these alpha software.
Right.
I think I did okay, but I think that pendulum had swung too far over to the technical side that I just had that appetite to get back into the technical stuff.
Right.
And so I found my way into doing CG supervision. Started at a little shop called Engine Room. With Andrew Honecker at the time, and Stephen Chu. You know Stephen, don't you?
I don't think so.
He's a shotgun guy who's been there for a long time at Shotgun.
Oh, right.
Shotgun. Anyhow, we were doing, I was doing a lot of like software development, to help TD work, right? We were building,
Sure.
render submitters to was it Smedge or was it? I don't think it was Smedge at the time. Maybe it was, but we were doing
Rush.
render submitters. Rush. It was Rush too. We started with Smedge and Mustard, and then went to Rush.
Okay.
And, writing submitters. Submitters to solve things. Doing a lot of fluid simulations and solving real flow simulations on the farm.
Right.
And I think Andrew just finished working on The Wild. It's like a movie that was done in Canada, Toronto, with, I think, who was the director? He was an old ex-ILM guy there for a long time. He animated the T-Rexes, didn't he?
Are you talking about Tippett?
No, not Tippett. Close. The CG stuff. He did a lot of the CG stuff. He's got a nickname.
Spaz Williams?
Spaz, yeah.
Yeah.
So they were
I know Spaz.
Yeah, they were at Core and working with Spaz on The Wild. And I think that's when Isaac and Don from Shotgun, it wasn't Shotgun at the time, came to him and said, let's build a production tracking system for the Core.
Right.
And I guess it went pretty well. And that was kind of the start of Shotgun. And Andrew came into, engine room. We're going to use this. Stop using this FileMaker. Stop using these Excel sheets. We're going to use Shotgun.
Okay.
And so I don't, if you know a lot about my history now, it's my story, is deep inside of Shotgun.
Sure.
Now. And we were like the first or second studio outside of Core to start using it. I think it was like Leica and us.
Right. Uh-huh.
I guess I have an appetite for the bleeding edge, and you bleed when you're on the edge.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's definitely you. That's definitely you. He would give you stuff that was definitely do not use with caution.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So we try to do, our commercial work, of all things, not film, not long format. So you had no appetite for failure with Shotgun. They had an early API, so I started writing, slinging some Python code to, register, shots and register, versions in there, and, send jobs to the farm to transcode FFmpeg, proxies and load them up. It was pretty wild.
Yeah.
So that was my, my return to CG related work, and it kind of led me to Zoic, which is quite a long story too.
Yeah, because that's again what I started running into again is when you were at Zoic and you were working on a lot of technology there, and you were really trying to push a lot of real-time ray tracing and doing a lot of the GPU ray tracing, and so that was something I was very much, when I first started at Chaos, that's what I was focusing on myself too.
When I got there, they kind of had different iterations of the pipeline that had failed or succeed. They said, you do, and I was doing a lot of like effects TD work, blowing up streets and cars and things and whatnot. I think before I got there, they even had an early version of V-Ray for Maya, and they did a demo, for a while of it. It was too early, and they started kind of pivoted to Mental Ray, and they kind of asked me to start working on the pipeline, and that's when my I started to veer off. It depends how you look at it. Veer deep into real-time rendering, or veer off of rendering into business intelligence. It started with we should use Shotgun, and then we should build a better interface to Rush. We should make an interface that's really intelligence to see what's rendering. I tell this story to a lot of people, but I think that was one of these origin stories. The movie Speed, where you have like Keanu Reeves at the end of the movie, and they're doing circle 8s in the middle of the airport on a bus, like a jalopy. And then they bring up this other bus that looks like a nice, really expensive bus. And they put like a drawbridge in, and they save all the hostages. That was what it was. It was like the buses were the pipeline. They had the old pipeline. They had the new pipeline. I couldn't interfere with the pipeline, and I had to save the hostages to move on to the new pipeline. So we literally used a render submitter for Rush to basically just feed the database with everything, your projects, your episodes, your tasks. You sent a job to the farm, and magically inside of Shotgun, without anyone using Shotgun at the time, it started to kind of feed the machine. And then when we got to a certain point, the CFO was like, "Can you build a time card system?" I'm like, "What? Okay." And he's like, "I want to be able to do actualization and from our bids and our work." And so ended up really getting deep into pipeline related stuff. And this push and pull between like business intelligence inside of visual effects and the creative intent, right? Because obviously at the time we were starting to use Mental Ray, trying to do these render buffers, which were poorly documented at the time, trying to build back to beauty. And we kept, getting awarded these shows where the shot counts would grow like really, really big. It started 50 shots for the CSI movie TV show, and then magically we started doing like, okay, we have this show called V and it's 150 shots, and then we have the show called Once Upon a Time and it's 300 shots, and it was a constant pull of like, well, we don't have a big enough render farm. We gotta find a better way to render this stuff in real time. It led to a lot of things, and we can go down those rabbit holes. Some of them were how do we get faster renders, i.e. exploring like Mock Studio and even, working with Lado, on early iterations of the GPU renderer, to like what I would consider the prerequisite to the modern day virtual production. How do you render in real time on set and finish on set?
Right.
We can go either way you want to talk about it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's something that I've been focusing on. Obviously, that's what I did with Kevin, and then we're talking to you about it as well, as to seeing how much we want to push the envelope on take production rendering, not just rasterized rendering. Take production ray tracing and see how fast we can make it to the point where it's a WYSIWYG experience. So
yeah. We had real world problems at the time. Like we had kind of done the show called V, where we did the pilot. It was very, I think you even met with Andrew, but it was done in a very like traditional sense, like green balls and sticks and tracking after the fact. We found a company called Previs Lightcraft by a gentleman named Elliot Mack, who had kind of was one of the prerequisites to virtual productions, and went out on a limb and said, let's try to make this production ready. And it was not production ready at the time.
Right.
So it meant like setting up a stage with all of these targets, fiducials, going out there with survey equipment and surveying all the fiducials to build a constellation, and then sending the constellation to this little like, IMU type witness camera to do a real-time tracking of the camera in that space. And then he was trying to catch up, trying to do, near real-time rendering and live chroma keying, and, and then if you were lucky to actually get tracking to be stable and you could get, a live composite, then the hope and the wish was that you could record each take and the tracking data. And after the show was, finished production, and they had two feeds, like the green screen feed and I just call it like the garbage comp. It was like supposed to be the final comp, but it looked pretty good at the time, and it required us to build, pre-baked models that all had the textures pre-lit, and we made it look as good as we could.
Right.
But the real benefit to all that was that we would move into post-production a lot quicker, because they'd see the shots and decide what the virtual space would look like long before they had to commit to them. And so what would happen is a show that might have a small shot count became a show that had a lot of shot counts, and we had to find a way to kind of salvage the tracking data that we had on set. So I ended up building a pipeline to kind of take the EDL that we got from our client, pair it with the FBXs that had time code embedded in it, pair it with the raw plate that was shot from camera, as well as the temp comp, and basically build, a Maya scene that had the tracking data, 80 to 90% ready for production. And the hope was that we would front load the asset building before we got on set. We were using V-Ray at the time to pre-light and pre-bake and pre-texture all the assets, and then send it to the farm and bake it with all these different variations of resolution, so that we wouldn't fill up the entire graphics card with all the memory. And by the time we got the stuff back, we had built all these Python scripts and code to kind of reassemble all the camera tracking data, and we'd run these like camera sims that would basically do the lighting solves, where we cache out the lighting solves in all the camera locations, so that when we went to do the V-Ray rendering, we already had the lighting solve, and it took like, instead of a 2-hour render taking 2 hours, it'd take 8 minutes to render the frame, because we spent 24 hours doing some lighting solve.
Right. And
we got good at it to the point where we'd get shows that would come in. Once Upon a Time was one of them, where we'd have 200, 300 shots. We had a whole bunch of Python code with shotgun kind of wrapped around it that would bring the plates online, that would, trim up the Maya scene, the FBX, to just the times of the of each cut from the EDL. We even go so far we even wrote like a I had an intern who became one of the smartest employees I've ever worked with. Sarah, she wrote a plugin that was like an image plane plugin, the My Image Plane plugin, but we wanted to have a chroma keyer built into it. So we had a chroma keyer built into that, that image plane, so that we could just, breeze through the shots, and you could give these to the CG lighting artists so they could kind of see, the image plane with a proxy, with a chroma key, and then see the background. And we were doing 200, 300 shots every 2.5, 3 weeks. It was crazy stuff.
That is crazy. That is crazy. But it's really impressive. And I think, the thing that I took away from this, and something that you and I were discussing even way back then, is that if you enabled filmmakers to see what they were going to get much sooner than they had done in the past. Yeah. And even if it wasn't exactly what they were going to do, it removed that layer of, I don't know, I'll see it later, and then we'll have to wait, So
it goes away.
75% of the decisions were made on set. And so you probably went through one or two versions of lighting at most, right? Yeah. Because it was all figured out.
Yeah. It got to the point where we had such a deep bench of all these, we had shows that were reoccurring, and it got so this appetite to give the client the ability to see things became so prevalent that we started building an iOS app that was basically a digital backlot, library where you could load all the assets for all the seasons. And I kind of ran, Sarah was one of the lead developers on that, where we kind of built this Unity app at the time where it could load up, a Unity asset inside of it, and you could frame a shot, you could measure a distance, you had an IMU from the iPad, you had blocking, you had lenses, and we could even send the data to Previs to load up, the camera blocking. Director could take it out to set and load up an asset and say, here's what you would see if you look over there, or here's what you would see if you look over there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The catch, though, this is really the catch at the time, was how do you retrain visual effects artists to be game artists, right? Because all the artists were all very much, put more polygons on the problem, round the corners. It doesn't really translate well into real-time rendering, and it certainly doesn't translate well to a mobile app that has a footprint that's, totally like a tenth of the size of your graphics card.
Right.
So we ended up writing some really slick tools like, okay, we were using V-Ray, we're using Maya, we've lit the scene. We ended up writing tools that would send jobs to the farm to bake out, all the variation, all the lighting elements as textures, make, 10 different versions, one at 256, one at 512, one at 1024. And then we had a visualization where you could kind of, arrow up or arrow down the texture, and it would tell you the size of your memory footprint. And then when you were done, you could send that scene to the farm, and it would basically open up Unity, translate that scene into a Unity asset, upload it to a cloud provider, this is before S3, where that asset would live in, the equivalent of an S3 bucket. And then we had to program Unity to pull at runtime on an iOS app that asset to load it, right? So that you could load it at runtime. And it was crazy. It's pretty slick stuff. Really way ahead.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, it's basically a virtual art department program is what you wrote. It's amazing.
It got even crazier. I think at the time there was an algorithm called SLAM. Have you heard of like SLAM tracking?
I think I have.
Yeah, it's basically the idea is that you have, these a witness camera, and it's tracking, artifacts and high contrast areas, and it literally can dynamically solve a camera on the fly. And I found this SLAM algorithm that I was like, well, why don't we make an iPhone app that we could pair with our iPad app, and the iPad app would use the phone's camera, the phone's GPU. We'd track where the camera is, and we'd have not just the orientation of the camera, but the position of the camera in the space. And then we'd have a live feed through like a UDP port to the iOS app, and that would track it. And so we had these like camera rigs where we had 2 pistol grips, an iPad in the middle, and an iPhone up that was looking up, that was literally making tracking data, streaming the tracking data into the iPhone
That's
app.
right. I remember this thing you built. Yeah.
It was it was pretty wild.
Yeah. Yeah. And now there's LiDAR built into your phone. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, a neat story about that kind of that pipeline, that virtual production pipeline that we built, early virtual production. I mentioned, I don't know if you picked up on it, but I mentioned a lot of these scripts that we wrote in Python were all to prep a scene, like for this type of virtual production work. They would literally parse, an EDL and send jobs to the farm to FFmpeg them. And Bruno from the Foundry came to me. He's like, at one of these SIGGRAPHs, he's like, I got something to show you. I'm like, what? He's like, I got this, I know you don't like Avid because you can't automate anything in there. Adobe Premiere didn't have any scripting language, and no one's going to learn JavaScript, that are basically, you really need Python in there. It's like, we got this thing called Hero. I'm like, well, what is it? He's like, think of it as the nonlinear editor version, that can do all the image processing using Nuke, but it's a nonlinear timeline. And I'm like, great, send it my way. And we literally, there's alpha versions. We literally retooled all of these automation scripts for this pipeline into using an early alpha version of Hero. That's when it was a long time ago. And I was like, wouldn't it be great if I had a channel, and the channel had a chroma keyer, and I had a GPU chroma keyer, and then I had another channel that was this is kind of me talking to them, and another channel that was could drive Unity or Unreal or a real-time engine underneath it. And when you move the timeline, we had, embedded metadata that would tell you what the camera position was and what the lens is, and it would tell what to render. And I started begging Vlado. I'm like, when we render these EXRs, you already have the metadata in there. You should pick I found this telemetry format in SMPTE from Elliot, and it basically gave instructions, like if you were building a drone, right? This is SMPTE instructions to store where you are in the world, how you're oriented in the world, and what lens you're using in the world. And I said, we got to get and I think Elliot was on the pack too, we got to get all the field recorders to lace them with, position data from these tracking systems. And then you could have a timeline where you could just scrub and just re-render the background and change it on the fly. It's happening now, but it didn't happen then.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, that's so cool. So how long were you at Zoic? You were there quite a while, weren't you?
9 years. 9 years.
9 years. Yeah.
It's a long time. And near the end, we were doing some neat stuff, did some, big data analytics stuff for, some government agencies. How do you visualize data semantically, temporally, geospatially? Started really, exploring more web stack stuff, right? What is React? How does React work with web stacks? Started using Unity as a kind of a plug-in to render, in a browser.
Right.
Looking at data. How do you look at a lot of data? Because I'm talking a lot about my CG experience, but you have to realize in my time at Zoic, I had, all these different personas. One was, the CG stuff, but the other one was kind of a data, really thinking about databases and schemas and how you store and manage data, to manage the business, not just, the pixels that you deliver. So got into that with them and started exploring things like Elasticsearch, something I knew nothing about at the time, right? Which is a search engine, which is it's based off of Lucerne. It's the common way that most search engines are kind of used today. And what we found is that they were starting to kind of do, I'd never been exposed to it, right? We're in visual effects. We don't really need to know lat long positions of, every pixel. But outside of our world, right, in the web technology world, there's databases where they're storing lat long information on all the entries in their database. And so I quickly got exposed to the notion that you could have a database entry that had a lat long. You could use something like Elasticsearch to do geospatial perimetering, and you could tie that to something like Cesium or just Google Earth, and you could literally take somebody to that place in the Earth based off of a query and aggregate, like, how many people hate like or dislike net neutrality, and you could literally take them to that place in the world where people had negative things to say about net neutrality. And we're doing a lot of visualizations and charting based off of some of that premise. It's kind of like, you hear in the news, like today, geopolitical stuff, and like the mules, and there's 2,000 mules, and they're talking about, how they're tracking cell phones and they're laced with, their tracking data. It's basically like, how do databases, correlate to places in the world where you're doing a query to find something, and then how do you take somebody to that place and show them, a satellite view or something. So we were doing some of that there. I don't know that was my calling,
Right.
But it was really fun. We got to go to Virginia. We got to meet with some, the big, agencies, and flex a bit. And that's kind of the end of that chapter at Zoic. Led to a new chapter, which was kind of different. I think it's when I kind of disappeared for a little bit from the industry. Sort of. I started working for Disney Imagineering. And initially the ask and the request of that role was to kind of help them build a pipeline for their VFX discipline. They call them DAOs, disciplines of work. And I came in there and they had Shotgun, but I quickly learned that Shotgun instance was an on-prem instance. It had multiple tenants, so it wasn't being, well managed. So there was really a lot of technical debt to make their Shotgun experience an improved experience for the visual effects department.
Sure.
I got really exposed to large enterprises because it's different working for a big corporation like Disney, right? And getting infrastructure in place that we could get into place at Zoic was a lot easier than anything you could ever do at Disney. So got paired with, a DevOps team who helped stand up, an instant, clean up that instance for us, scale that instance so that it had, redundancy, so that it was not like fragile. It would, it'd stay up, and if you published too many things, it didn't fall down. And we ended up kind of migrating their Shotgun instance, on-prem in these VMwares all the way up to an AWS cloud instances and services. Which was even before Shotgun had, right? They gave us these Docker images and like, we're not even using AWS yet. And like, well, we're gonna basically make our own on-prem AWS instance of ShotGrid, with scaled transcoding and processing and, APIs. So I helped, work through that effort, all the while trying to help build a pipeline for the VFX department. And I was umbrellaed under the R&D group, under John Snoddy, and I reported directly to Bei Yang. And they're like, well, why don't we should talk about using this Shotgun thing for scope management. I'm like, what's scope management? So just a background about Disney Imagineering. There's kind of three groups that kind of help build these attractions and rides. You have like a ride group, and they build, the ride vehicles and the ride paths, right? The things that, the guests sit in that keep them safe. There's an architecture group who's responsible for designing the building, the envelope, right? That the ride vehicle needs to sit inside, right? And then there's a show group, and their responsibility is to kind of decorate the ride and the envelope so that it's themed. And they said, we have this new project that's going on called, Star Wars Land. We called it Delos at the time.
Yep.
And it's, this $2 billion project that's being built in 2 locations at once. And the show team, they kind of aren't digital yet, so we need to help them become more digital, right? They're tracking everything that they install in the facility in Excel. We really think there's a better way to do it. What do you think about trying to do it with shotgun?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, let me understand this. We have 3 groups, and inside of those groups, collectively, there's 150 different disciplines: show lighting, theme lighting, graphics, visual effects, audio, everything you can imagine under the sun that helps build these attractions. They all have physical assets that need to be tracked, and you want me to try to mold shotgun into a scope management system to help track the installation, the design, the acquisition, the entire process of all these show elements, physical elements. Right. And Bay's like, yeah, I want to do that. And he's like, and I also want to do the digital assets too. I'm like, oh, of course, right? The visual effects, right? That projects on the screen. It's like, yeah, that's some of it, but some of it's also like the instructions to the animatronics or the instructions to the ride vehicle.
Shotgun was not really designed for this.
No, but there's kind of a plan here. So let's track all the physical assets, right? Uh-huh. Let's track all the digital assets. And that's when I got exposed to what BIM is, the building information model, right?
Oh, God.
Right. Yeah, well, we're going to do BIM. We're going to use Revit, and we're going to build this model. We're going to stuff every piece of show element in that model you could ever imagine, right? Every stormtrooper, every helmet on the shelf, every element, we're going to track it in there. So we're going to make this BIM model, and we're going to save FBXs, and we want to visualize the attraction, right? You come from visual effects, the idea of shot assembly, but we don't have shot assembly. What we need to do is we need to do ride show assembly. We want to assemble the ride, nightly, so that we can basically iterate, right, on the attraction. And better yet, we want to render it in real time on a game engine in a cave. Or maybe we want to put somebody in a motion control vehicle with a virtual reality helmet, and we want to put them down the ride vehicle path. And all that data that you're putting in there that says, here's all the artifacts about, the model that was published or the ride path that was published. By the way, wouldn't it be great if you could point to that thing and say, when does that install? When does that get delivered? Is that in the warehouse? How much did that cost? Imagine having an experience taking you through the attraction, not just taking you through what the creative intent was the attraction, but also helping you see the show scope. So I had these 2 juxtaposing, scope to manage with different stakeholders, right? I had a lady, her name was Mindy Wilson, and she managed all these coordinators who managed this scope list. I need 100 of this, I need 1,000,000 of this, I need 1,000 of this. Here's the vendors we're going to use. And she had this agenda to kind of focus on that. I had Bay, who had already kind of got the balls rolling on kind of visualizing this experience in Katana. And I had, some partners in our team that were working on the Revit side of things, where they were generating these FBX models that were totally like non-conducive for real-time rendering, right?
Right.
So it started with, we're going to build our own, FBX exporter for Revit that's, that deletes coplanar vertices, that, initiates, instances so that, if I had a banister, I had one instance of a rail that got repeated over and over again. We're going to make a smart FBX so that there is actually a possibility that we could do frustum culling in a, Unreal, and we could render in real time, even though the BIM model took like forever to generate, right? If you just called it to the scene you're in, right? Maybe you could render in real time.
Right.
My 2 responsibilities ended up becoming, a mountain of, I think there needs to be more than one product owner managing this, right?
Right.
And so I kind of divested some of the visualization parts of those aspects of that project, and largely focused on this scope management. To me, that was really the kind of the golden project, right? Because really, it wasn't just about Star Wars Land. It was about every project using a unified tracking system, production tracking system, right? By the time I'd been there for 4 years, we had gotten almost all the future, projects into the system. And you could answer that magic question, which was like, okay, are we sending too much work to one vendor? Because every single bit of scope was attached to which vendors were supplying that work. And we could actually determine the amount of scope that was being determined by all these vendors, whether they were show vendors that were doing media, or whether they were building, sconces and lights and all these things. It was pretty neat to be able to build that system, and a lot of pressure to build it right. And I think it was very transformative for me, because I started, in this scrappy Python, environment that a lot of TDs start with. It got into building, more mature monolithic PySide apps for Zoic, like things that could submit jobs to farms, render and manage rendering, and how you work in a DCC, to, well, by the way, we're Disney, we don't really have a disk image, so don't expect a machine to be configured the way you want. And all the things about doing software development, throw them out the door. You have to figure out how to develop with developers that are pipeline developers, but you have to think about it in a full web stack, right? And so I got this crazy idea. I thought it was unique at the time. I learned it wasn't so unique, but it was cool at the time. Sure. That there's a great way for you to, and I learned this technique from Once Upon a Time, where we were turning, traditional CG art, lighting artists into game artists, right? How do you make a workforce translate them into doing something that they weren't necessarily trained to do, right? To be a game artist, you build these black boxes that send things out into the ether and return them back so that they're kind of configured, appropriately for a game engine. Well, I had that same problem here. Was like, how do I make, pipeline developers into full stack developers without having to have them worry about a full web stack? So I had this intern who was really smart, and I asked him, I'm like, could you experiment with me for a few days? I want you to make, a Python wrapper to React. And I learned this from like old TCL Nuke interface days, right? Where I'm like, I want a form, I want an input dialog, and an OK cancel button. And I want the OK cancel button to kind of collect the values that you get from this form dialog to send and run some Python. So I had him build me a little experiment where I had to sling very little like React code. I could describe a React interface, a form dialog. The simplest part of a DCC application is, how do you get data into the form? And I'm like, can you describe it as like a Python so I could make other developers build things? And he's like, yeah. So we got into this act of like learning React, learning Material UI, which are all web stack things, building a Docker image, again, stuff that you don't generally do in visual effects, that could set up and configure, it's like a DevOps work, a kind of a server who would take Python, JSON instructions via Python to build a form. And so we went through every single component, like default value is this, I want it to be an array and it needs to return values like this. And so we started building like dozens upon dozens of these interfaces. You take for granted it inside of Maya or Nuke, right? Because you kind of have the environment comes when you install that package, right? But we wanted to build it on top of Shotgun, and we wanted it to be available globally anywhere, right? Whether it be Shanghai, whether it be Paris, Florida, anywhere. And this is the way that I didn't have to worry about asking, an IT department to install Python and getting them to, give me permissions to put a protocol handler that executed Python that was really not secure. And so we built these really awesome tools that did things like cloud publishing, right? I have some artifact like an animation rig, right? And it produces some CSV data that tells how an animatronic needs to work. We built these forms where we could it was a cloud publisher where they could upload that file, it'd go to kind of a temporary space, it'd validate it, and then it would publish it into Shotgun and store it onto the file system, right? And name it appropriately. So it was pretty cool. It's really neat projects.
That's a huge project, Mike.
Yeah.
Is that the biggest one you've worked on? I mean, it's even bigger than your iPad thing that you did at SOA.
Yeah, it definitely is bigger. It was the biggest at the time.
Yeah.
I think what I'm doing now is a little bit bigger, but it's more challenging. So I'll kind of tell you how I got to Fuse.
Okay.
So one of the project managers for Star Wars Land, her name was Jennifer Voigt. She really was like one of these, like when you have these like cheerleaders who are like, really like, do it. I'm in for it. Let's go. I'm all in, right? She was all into what I was doing with ShotGrid. So it really helped push the narrative of what we were doing at Imagineering. And near the close of the Star Wars project, she moved on to a different role at a different company. She moved on to a role at Madison Square Gardens, which was a pretty big role. They were doing this Sphere project, and it was April of 2020. Yep. She's asked, she's like, would you consider coming here, right, and helping me do what you did help you do what you did there, do that here, because kind of what I'd done at Imagineering kind of got into a sustainment. They're talking about putting it into sustainment mode. We had trainers who were training people to use it, right? I could keep pushing that envelope, but at the end of the day, I think that they wanted to kind of move some of my expertise into focusing on other challenging problems there. And Jen asked me if I was interested in it, and she's like, yeah, we have this 20K dome that has LCD screens on the inside, or LED screens on the inside and LED screens on the outside. We need to build a show system. We need to build a studio that can build production for this thing. And I took the bait.
Right.
I took the bait and went over there. And I think right when like the first week I started was the week that all of COVID just hit the ground. And I was in New York visiting too. So I'd been in New York, on 2 occasions during 2 major world catastrophes. One was 9/11 and one was the outbreak of COVID.
Right.
Wow. So I was there. I know I was sick, and I think I had COVID, and I was in my apartment, or my condo, not my condo, my hotel room there.
Right.
I just wanted to get home.
Right.
Is serendipitous or not? I don't know how you look at it, but really you can assume that most of the amusement park entertainment industry kind of collapsed at that time, right? Disney's closed. Disneyland's never been closed. It's closed, right? No one's going to Madison Square Gardens, and we're not sure where this is going to lead to. I got hired to build this big thing that I had a lot of experience on how to build it better. Right. But Madison Square Gardens didn't, they weren't sure where things were going, and I wasn't given the resources to fly, right? So I couldn't hire developers. A lot of political drama.
Sure.
And rightfully for the time, and a lot of people kind of trying to figure out, where things were going to go. So I'm like, okay, well, if I can't hire a DevOps team and have these full stack developers, maybe I have to do that. Maybe I have to learn how to be a full stack developer. Maybe I have to learn how to be a DevOps, person. But I'm like, they're never going to give me a server. There's not even a rack room for me to put a server if I wanted one.
Right.
I naively took my credit card onto the computer, opened up AWS, signed up for an account, and figured out and learned some of these AWS services. One of them in particular is called Lambda. In CG we talk about cloud rendering, right? We're going to spin up these EC2 instance and we're going to render. Does it have a GPU? Does it not? There's also this thing called Lambda. And it's like ephemeral computing. It's like, I need to compute something, but I only need 10 seconds of your time to compute it. And I only want to pay for 10 seconds. So I taught myself a little bit about Lambda and serverless and kind of hobbled together a prototype that could basically turn Shotgun into a cloud-based event tracking system. Meaning, Shotgun has things like action menus or webhooks or cron services that do business intelligence, like change field A needs to change field B. Maybe a webhook gets triggered, an event gets triggered, and it gets processed. The status of this shot becomes, the change the status of this task, things like that. So I wrote these little examples, and I found that there was already a library that did this JSON, to React thing that I thought I had largely kind of invented. There was already a library, an open source library that did a lot of that. So I basically wrote, 3 different modules because I had a lot of time, right? That we weren't sure where things were going. So I wrote, one to manage actions, and it would ephemerally, build an interface. There's no static, HTML ever. It would literally ephemerally build, on a Lambda, an interface in React, get your input. Maybe you upload a file, and then it would translate that file. In this case, we were getting bids from vendors, and it would translate the bid into tables in the database for bid items and bid versions. So we could do like scenario planning of different vendors and which one was the best vendor to work with. And I was literally teaching myself how to use cloud services and kind of reinventing everything I knew about pipelines. Like, pipelines are these things that are all locally hosted services, and compute with Python. And it said, no, it all has to be in the cloud. There's another way to do that. And kind of taught myself how to use some of these cloud services, to do it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Didn't get too far given the nature of, where everything was in the industry. Yeah. But an old colleague from Zoic knocked on my door. Jason Fodder, who's the CTO of Fuse. He's like, look, we do all these visual effects. We're one of the premier visual effects facilities in the industry right now. We have a pipeline, it's aging. We want to transition from this pipeline that we built that's kind of bootstrapped on top of FileMaker, and we want to transition into Shotgun, and you're kind of the expert at that. Is that something you'd be interested in? I said, okay, well, yeah, but I want to do it my way. I don't want to reinvent the wheel the same way. I'm not, I want to think about these things, for global scale and reliability. I want to think about how you build something that can grow really, really large. She's like, great, because we have a private equity firm and that owns us now, and we want to be global too, and we're scaling our business.
Right.
And so that brought me into a role where I kind of was responsible for helping move the pipeline, the production pipeline and the business intelligence pipeline, from a pretty rank and file pipeline, things that are done off of local services, into a cloud services, SaaS products, and my vision was to kind of do it on top of AWS. So I wanted to build a layer on top of all that stuff that allowed you to build every interface you could ever want. I could find the entire pool of developers that our pipeline developers could be trained and could learn the acumen to build web apps, through this abstraction layer on JSON. I didn't need an entire army of full stack developers, and I don't need an army of DevOps engineers, staging up instances. We could do it all in AWS. That's kind of what I pitched to them. As quick as I started doing that, it became, kind of the same story with, Zoic too, is like, we want you to focus on production management, but we also have business intelligence. We have bidding systems, bid publishers, and actualizing, and we have our own time card system, and we have this private equity firm that wants to look at our reporting and our charting data, big data analytics, all the things that I learned at this, the government agencies. We need to harness that too. So I spent a year kind of focusing on both of those things, building up the pipeline to do that, tying it into a lot of systems. So it wasn't just like one of the things you hear when people talk about production tracking is like a source of truth, right? Single source of truth. You hear that a lot. But a single source of truth, in visual effects, you might say Shotgun is a source of truth. But the reality is it's a source of truth to like the user, right? If you're an accounting department, Shotgun will never be your source of truth. NetSuite or your ADP system, your accounting system, that's your source of truth, right? So it really just depends. And the BIM model, right? I learned that at Imagineering. The BIM model, Shotgun will never be the source of truth for the AEC group that was building the BIM model. It's always the BIM model.
The
right?
BIM model is the source of truth. Yeah.
Yeah. But the problem is it's the source of truth for the dimensional source of truth, because getting all the metadata out of it is just a nonsensical bear to query. Right. So when I got to Fuse, we have a lot of sources of truths, right? NetSuite, it's kind of a financial reporting type source of truth. We were using Domo. I don't know if you've heard of Tableau, but it's kind of like a charting.
Oh, yeah, I know I've heard of Tableau.
Yeah. You have AD, a traditional visual effects pipeline has AD, right? This is your profile. You log in using AD. It's a source of truth to who you are. We had, these recruiting platforms, Taleo. You had all these sources of truths. So we've been building, and we're still building, but it's getting really mature and it's really awesome. We're building a layer that sits on top of all this, inside on top of AWS, that basically can shepherd data in and out of these systems, syncing data from different databases, ephemerally, right? Our monthly charge on AWS is like $250, $500, right? That's a lot cheaper. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot cheaper than standing up an EC2 instance that's on all day long.
Yeah.
Right. And then, so we have this fabric, this layer that we call Nucleus that sits on top of it that kind of shepherds data in and out of all these different systems. Right now, there's a big disposition to what we're doing with business intelligence. So I've taken a little bit of a backseat to the production management stuff, but it sits on top of it, doing some really wild things, building a global time card system, but, one that maybe people hate less. A scheduling system, to do resource planning. We're building, bid publishing and things like really sophisticated, web stack applications. And, built on this framework that helps kind of, I call it, you're just giving people superpowers, right? How do you give, an artist or developer, a superpower to do something, that they maybe don't have all that domain expertise? You do it by building these wrappers that help do those things. And so the team, I have a great team of, a bunch of developers who are, at different levels, really kind of flexing their muscles in, full stack development, but really coming, a lot of them from roots, in traditional VFX pipeline and solving really hard problems about how to manage, the success of a company, like revenue recognized or gross profit margins, and dealing with things like ADP. They're not sexy, but when you sew a thread that ties it into the production tracking system, it's pretty cool. Like, imagine doing like a chart that showed you bubbles of, your business and which ones are the biggest projects and which ones are the smallest projects. And imagine going into a bubble and finding a sequence and then clicking on the sequence and it automatically opens up RV with the latest versions. Right? Because of the experience I've had in visual effects, I can kind of tie the business intelligence into the experience and the artifacts around production experiences. So I find it really empowering. I think it's bigger.
That's again, another very ambitious project. You seem to be doing a lot of those. So
yeah. So
that's what you're in the middle of doing right now, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've been at Fuse like less than a year, right?
2 years now.
2 years. Okay.
Oh, coming on 2 years now. Yeah. And so
Wow. All right.
Fuse has been growing. They merged with a company called Folks. Sorry, battery time. So now we had 2 production pipelines. They also merged with RSP, so Rising Sun Pictures. Also another, shotgun-enabled company. We recently merged with another company in Spain called El Ranchito.
Oh, okay.
So there's a lot of work being produced here, and there's quite the appetite to kind of consolidate, the production pipelines and the business intelligence pipeline into things that are really efficient and lean and scalable. Right. Yeah.
Well, that's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. Well, we've gone a little long, but I don't think that's a problem. No. It's all good. I wanted to make sure we had the whole story, but it's pretty cool. I mean, so this is going to be a difficult question, but we'll try to end on this. What do you think is, you've noticed a lot of stuff in the visual effects industry, obviously in the business side of things. What is a trend that you're noticing that's going on right now that you think is going to be an important one that's going to change the way that that we operate as businesses?
There's so many different trends. Right now, the trend that I'm gravitate to is this notion of, services, microservices that help kind of service our industry, our businesses. You may not realize them, but they're out in the wild. Web stacks are becoming more and more a part of the visual effects stack, sometimes to hide, some of the magic. Like you look at Midjourney, right? You have this AI that runs on services that sit in the cloud, right? Yep. You have MetaHuman that's probably backed by a cloud service from Unity that does these things. I tend to think that microservices.
MetaHuman is epic, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe that some of these things are back-ended by web services.
Absolutely.
So my theory is that you're going to see more and more of these services find their way into our workflows that kind of they're like the magic 8-ball where you shake them and out the other end comes something magical, right? They tell you a business like in my case, a lot of times you shake the magic 8-ball to find out something about your business, or you shake the magic 8-ball and out comes a MetaHuman, or you shake the magic 8-ball and out comes the other end some Midjourney like AI representation of what you could dream about.
But what's amazing to me, I think you're right. But what's amazing to me is Midjourney is so far different from anything that I've used in the way that it operates.
Yep. Like
the fact that you go onto a Discord
yep.
and use /imagine and just start typing words. And that's what generates the image.
Exactly.
The fact that it's on a Discord, the fact that it's just weird prompts on a Discord and is run by bots.
Yes.
It's so different and so cool too. I definitely think it's cool.
So from my perspective, from pipeline, I think that really you're going to see pipeline developers get to the point where they're like, I don't want to write another submitter, a loader, a publisher. And they're going to have this appetite to do something so much bigger than that, right?
Right.
And my vision of where we go in this industry is that cloud, does it. And some of these web stacks are doing some really remarkable things. I'm going to give you just a little example.
Sure.
We use Material UI. It's a kind of a web stack library for building user interfaces. I've used it for a long time at
came out of Google, right?
Facebook or Google. Yeah, Google. Got them mixed up. Yeah. And I was looking at some of the new components, and I'm like, ooh, there's a query component. And I looked at the query component, and it looks exactly like, shotgun query. I want to see this field. It is this. It isn't that. It's that. And so now you're basically you're commoditizing this really like if you think about Shotgun, really the power of Shotgun has been this Excel grid view, right? With a query component on the top right-hand corner that can basically build you a query that can tell you whatever you need to know. I call it the magic 8-ball, right?
Right.
And so we started kind of building an abstraction layer to that query component. And I asked, our Stack developer, I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if I could say, hey, Alexa, I want to look at all the data from every location that's this, that's that. Wouldn't it be great if we had verbal translation of me articulating a query and it yields a response, right? The same as Midjourney and Discord, like you said. And then I called up our AWS guy. He's like, yeah, we got that. It's already there in AWS. There's a query, a language that it'll translate the
natural language,
to translate your language into a query, to a MySQL query. I'm like, that's cool. That's where I think things go.
Right. Like, hey, do my time card.
Yeah, exactly. Do my time card. That's exactly what it should be doing. It should. I see that you published this shot. I see that you touched this shot. You saved this scene. That's what. Honestly, that's what it should be.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
And that makes a better business, right?
Yep.
And that basically keeps more of us employed, right? Because then our margins, are not as slim as they were before, right? Mm-hmm. I kind of think technology can help solve some of those challenges.
Yeah. That would be great. That would be amazing. That would be great. Well, that is a very interesting answer, which is really cool, because it's funny because a lot of people now are talking about virtual production or whatever, but you're like, no, let's think about beyond that.
Honestly, I can tell you a place where I see all these things that I'm talking about, like this React. I think they belong in virtual production too, right?
Yeah, of course.
Instead of us building these cockamamie, sorry, I use the word cockamamie, I might be old soul, but these iOS apps that are like one trick ponies. Imagine building these apps, the same way I'm talking about these ephemeral apps to control the virtual production set. Drive the lighting, drive this. Imagine it was as easy as you slinging Python code, sending it to AWS, and basically having some secure access to it. Right, I just think that largely developers in our industries have kind of had a limited exposure to cloud stacks, and I think when you start to see them kind of flourish and blossom into some of these cloud stacks, you're going to see a lot of neat things find their way into virtual production too. Right.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, but yeah, virtual production could definitely benefit from that as well. So that's cool. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for this amazing journey that you took us through, and to be able to talk about some of the incredible stuff that you've done. Sure. It's always good seeing you. We should see each other. I think the last time we ran into each other was actually at Disneyland.
Oh, yeah.
I saw you. I was like, that's Mike Romey, because obviously you were still working at Disney at the time, and so you had the employee pass. And you were giving us the lowdown on how to navigate the fast passes to get to. I think we were in California Adventure at that time, so it was fun. Yeah. So
well, I hope you guys are doing well too. I miss seeing you guys, and I can't wait for things to get a little bit more normal. It'd be great to do one of these, as a roundtable event with you one day.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely could do that. Yeah, I've actually been having conversations about starting roundtables again, so that'd be a good thing. But I'm sure at some point things will ease up and people will start going back to offices a little bit more. I kind of like the not necessarily having to do that, but at some point a good visit to to Fuse would be in the works, which would be great, because you guys you're still in that office down there, right? In
Van Nuys, and then. But now it's just ballooning. So there's offices in in BC,
it sounds like it.
Montreal, New York, Georgia, Bogota. So maybe we'll be in a different office.
There you go. There you go. All right, Mike. Well, have a good one. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye, Chris.